Shadow Justice Minister Robert Jenrick. Robert, thank you very much.
Good evening.
Great to have you on the show. First things first, what do you make of what we've seen there? So 10% tariff on Britain. It is 20% for the EU.
Look, it's deeply concerning for British businesses and workers right across the country in many sectors, but in particular in the British car manufacturing sector, which exports so much to the United States. I think there's a serious failure of the Starmer negotiating team. Keir Starmer is not a good negotiator. We've seen that in many other respects, like the Chagos deal, for example. He sacked the trade negotiator, Crawford Faulkner, who we had when we were in government, a highly respected individual. And he's lent upon Peter Mandelson, who frankly wouldn't know British interests if they slapped him in the face. This is a big failure. We've got to ensure now that Starmer gets back around the table and ultimately puts British interests first, because that is what Donald Trump is doing.
Jenrick squarely brings out the shortcomings of the Starmer government, arguing that the UK may have avoided tariffs completely if it had followed a stricter line. Jenrick does, however, also agree that Britain's situation is better than that of the EU, which suffers with 20%. Make sure to like and subscribe.
He's putting the interests of the United States and American workers first, and I want to see Starmer do exactly the same.
Okay.
He shouldn't be pushed around by other countries, even if they're bigger players than us. So all options should remain on the table.
I've just had it in my ear that Trade Secretary or Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds has released a statement. So I'll read this out, reading it for the first time now, and I'll get your reaction to it, Mr. Jenrick, if that's okay. He says, "Nobody wants a trade war, and our intention remains to secure a deal. But nothing is off the table, and the government will do everything necessary to defend the UK's national interest." I'll read that one more time. This is Jonathan Reynolds, Business Secretary, saying, "Nobody wants a trade war, and our intention remains to secure a deal. But nothing is off the table, and the government will do everything necessary to defend the UK's national interest." Your views on that?
Well, look, Jonathan Reynolds has only in the last few days been to Washington and sat round the table with his opposite number. The Starmer government should have been in the room with the Trump administration long ago. Think of that visit that Starmer had, which was lauded by some parts of the press, where he sat in the Oval Office. What did that actually achieve? He offered a state visit to the United Kingdom, and then Donald Trump has gone and imposed tariffs. Sure, they're less than had we remained within the European Union, but they're still going to be very, very serious for British business, particularly the car manufacturing industry, which is already on its knees, thanks to the net zero zealotry of Ed Miliband and policies that are really, really harming jobs and livelihoods in places like Luton and Sunderland right now. So I want to see Starmer step up. I want to see him negotiating a trade arrangement that hives the UK out from these tariffs as quickly as possible, which is what he was promising just a few days ago.
Surely we should also now be seeing what Emmanuel Macron did when he came over under Theresa May, by the way, and then stood on the steps of Downing Street and said to every single French citizen, "Come back to the motherland, come back to France, we want your money, we want you over here, we want your wealth." He wasn't shy about doing that.
Jenrick calls for quick negotiations to safeguard UK industry and describes Starmer's actions as performative rather than effective. Patrick Christys advises Starmer to follow the wooing of companies from outside strategy of Emmanuel Macron.
Why doesn't Keir Starmer now stand up and say, OK, if you're a big business that's based in the European Union, get yourself to Britain. You can halve the amount of tariffs that you're paying there. This is the kind of stuff that he should be doing now.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to see him getting businesses to come and relocate here in the UK, trying to make the best of a bad situation and standing up for Britain. You know, don't be pushed around. Even if the United States is a bigger player than us, don't be pushed around, put British interests first.
But I don't think he is being pushed around. I really don't think he is being pushed around. The fact of the matter is, we're on 10%. Nobody else is on 10%. That's a win for Starmer.
There are other countries, if you look down the list, who are on 10%.
Okay, in comparison
just
with
not the European Union.
Well, in comparison with China, 34%. So, you know, you can't have it both ways. Starmer is standing up for us. He's played. People have said, oh, he crawled to Trump in the White House with the royal invitation, but in fact he's playing it well. And he stood up in Parliament today, and this is his game. And it's not over yet. This is Trump's opening gambit. This is Trump saying, OK, here's the deck. And we all have to come back and then negotiate.
Well, with respect, I don't think that car manufacturing workers in Sunderland will feel your sense of jubilation tonight.
No,
they'll be very worried about their jobs.
It'll come back.
People who are working in the luxury car manufacturing industry here in the UK, which is predominantly export to the United States, will be deeply worried about this.
The entire world has got 25%. And I can bet you in the coming weeks, Starmer will claw something back.
Well, let's wait and see. I don't share your enthusiasm for Starmer's negotiating skills. Look what he's done in the past.
What would Kemi Badenoch have done? And tell me, how would she have bettered that?
Well, she wouldn't have sacked our chief trade negotiator, for example, Crawford Faulkner, which was one of the first things that Jonathan Reynolds did. Frankly, we would have a decent trade secretary. Jonathan Reynolds, remember, is the guy who lied about being a solicitor, has no commercial experience whatsoever, fabricated his own CV.
That's irrelevant in this situation.
I don't think it is irrelevant, because in a situation as serious as this, I want somebody good around the table, not somebody whose CV was so weak he had to make it up.
That's why I'm querying Kemi Badenoch.
Well, I would rather have Kemi Badenoch around the table than Jonathan Reynolds.
Catherine, you were just to make a point on something.
Yes.
Myskow stands up for Starmer, but Jenrick writes off her optimism. According to him, the Starmer government is not competent enough to negotiate a really advantageous agreement. She tried to push him furthermore, but fell short once more.
Okay.
But don't you agree that for decades the two-tier system existed, but in the other way round? That black people and minorities were targeted actually far more than white people?
No. I don't think...
That's factually correct.
It isn't.
It is
There is no...
correct.
I do not believe our criminal justice system is institutionally racist. There's no conclusive or consistent evidence that someone is more likely to be charged or sentenced because of the colour of their skin. What there definitely is differentials in outcomes. Some ethnic minority groups are more likely to commit crime than others. But I don't believe you correct that by lacing our whole system with discrimination.
No, I agree.
I want people to be treated equally before the law. That, to me, is the absolute essence
Minister
of the rule of law.
Mahmood has said very clearly that's what she wants to change.
Well, it's not what's happening in her department, because she's peddling two-tier justice with every passing day we find...
She's changing it.
To come in on this, when you were in power, Robert, you not only kept all of this net zero stuff, you kept the fines. So though you moved it back by 5 years, you kept the fines. You know, if they don't sell 28% of EVs, they get £15,000 a car, which is a massive fine. So please don't be too high on your high horse. Meanwhile, you're absolutely right. This is a negotiating ploy. Trump couldn't negotiate trade deals because the US had incredibly low tariffs. Many of the things we bought from them were zero tariffed. So you can't negotiate. If you go to the Trade Department today, and I'm on the Trade and Agriculture Commission, and ask them why we have 10% tariffs on oranges, they will say, oh, it's so we can negotiate trade deals. So we kept a whole lot of the EU's very high agricultural tariffs on so that we could go and negotiate a deal with Australia and a deal with New Zealand, etc., and the CPTPP. Trump couldn't negotiate with anyone because every country in the world is saying, well, we've already got free access to your country, so why would we do a negotiation with you? So what he's done is incredibly smart. And yes, he needs to get the products of industry back. He had the high-level stuff, but he had lost the basis. And without the steel making, without the aluminium, without the tools, without the parts, you can't actually build the Air Force. And yet we all expect his Air Force to come and save us when we next get attacked. And yet he wasn't responsible for that. China was making all the parts. We saw that in COVID. Our car industry went to zero because we couldn't get a $600 chip out of China. And so the Rolls-Royce is sitting there waiting to be exported because it can't get a and it's a £600,000 car. I mean, you need to have those products. So he's making sense.
Others weigh in, talking about the US negotiating strategy and the difficulties of net zero. Jenrick's position is still that Britain shouldn't give in too much.
As our resident American on the panel, Republican commentator Norley Knotson, who's been sitting there very patiently for the last hour and a half, actually, how do you feel as an American seeing that and hearing the Economist reaction from Catherine saying that what Donald Trump has done is actually very smart?
He wants to bring people to the negotiating table, and he wants to talk about the art of the possible. And that's the way to do it. And let's keep this in perspective as well, because coming from a very low base, he's also trying to negotiate a peace deal right now between Russia and Ukraine. And in order to bring Europe on board as well, that's another lever he's going to have for negotiation, also with the UK as well. So he's thinking strategically. And Americans are very happy, as you rightly pointed out. We don't want supply chain vulnerabilities with China. And to have TSMC investing in Arizona, $200 billion, he's gotten over $2 trillion foreign direct investment into the U.S. He hasn't even been in power for 3 months. We're drilling. We're at the highest we've ever been in oil. So that's also going to bring down concerns about inflation. So I think we're in a great position.
The American visitor defends Trump's strategy among the panel's other comments. Jenrick gently underlines his point of view. The UK has national interests as first priority as well. Patrick Christie's momentarily turns his attention to US policies on two-tier sentencing and free speech. Jenrick notes the previous government's position and compliments popular uproar for undoing biased policies meant to discriminate.
I think people in this country are sick of certain groups being prioritised, being put forward, and that's incredibly patronising, frankly, also to ethnic minorities, to suggest that just because of the colour of your skin or the faith that you have, you're more likely to commit crime or you should be given a more lenient sentence. And so the two-tier justice campaign goes on. It is two-tier justice under two-tier Keir.
Jenrick emphasises that Britain has to uphold consistent values, that of the national interest above divisive identity policies, especially if it aims to keep a strong stance in trade negotiations with the US. At last, Catherine underlines a 400-page US analysis on EU trade policies, pointing out that many followed Brexit. Jenrick underlines once more why quitting the EU was absolutely necessary to avert the continent's 20% tariff destiny.
Should Remainers, Mr. Jenrick, be saying a whopping great big thank you to Brexiteers tonight, do you think?
I think they should. Look, this is very harmful regardless, but clearly would be dramatically worse if we were still in the EU tonight. So the ability to have our own freedoms, to set our own trade policy and not be lumped in with the rest of continental Europe is immensely beneficial to the British economy tonight.
With these last comments, Jenrick reinforces his point of view. Brexit's wisdom is demonstrated by Britain's partial immunity from higher taxes. Without a forceful rebuttal, Nina Myskow is left without direction. Jenrick steps forward as the stronger voice, advocating the value of sovereignty, strict negotiation, and UK interests first. Robert Jenrick underlines Brexit's success in protecting the UK from devastating EU-level tariffs, while steadfastly arguing that the government's approach under Starmer falls short. Though Nina Myskow tries to credit Starmer for only a 10% tariff, Jenrick maintains the car manufacturing sector and more general British industries remain under threat, and that strong negotiation, something Starmer has neglected, is the true answer. Thanks to Brexit's freedom and the possibility for better trade accords with the US, so long as British politicians really defend the national interest, Jenrick is ultimately vindicated in demonstrating how the UK is in a stronger position than the EU.